Welcome to the Ecommerce Marketing Podcast, the highly rated digital marketing podcast that provides weekly digital marketing tips and strategies from some of the world's top digital marketers and e-commerce entrepreneurs that will help you take your digital marketing to the next level. Sit back and enjoy this power-packed episode hosted by Arlen Robinson, who is an e-commerce entrepreneur and digital marketing expert with over 20 years of experience. Hey, e-commerce marketing podcast listener. Are you looking to increase traffic and sales to your website? You can do this by launching your own affiliate program. Just visit getosi.com and sign up for a free trial today. That's getosi.com. Now get ready to hear from your e-commerce marketing expert of the week as they drill down to give you details on marketing strategies that can help grow your business.
Welcome back to the E-Commerce Marketing Podcast, everyone. I am your host, Arlen Robinson, and today we have a very special guest, Shane Bishop, who is the head wizard at EWWW Image Optimizer, where they focus on site performance and especially image optimization. Welcome to the podcast, Shane.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Yes, I'm excited to talk to you, and I appreciate you coming on and joining us today. Today we're going to be diving deep about site performance, which is kind of your bread and butter. We're going to talk about some of the things that specifically an e-commerce business needs to do to increase their performance. A lot of times, of course, their site's performance rather. A lot of times on the site, we're talking a lot about marketing and messaging and all that type of stuff. But a lot of times the site's performance becomes an afterthought. We do touch on a little bit of performance. I've talked about it before when we've had guests on that talked about conversion rate optimization. And I know site performance is kind of tied into that. That's probably kind of a little tool in your toolkit, to kind of deal with that. So dealing with the site performance is very important because there's no sense in spending marketing dollars or doing SEO, organic SEO, if you have a poor performing site. And, so it's very important that you kind of get that up to speed before you start sending, a ton of visitors through your site. So that's what we're going to be diving deep today to talk about. But before we do get into all of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and, how you did get into what you're doing today?
Sure. So started out doing IT work at a couple different colleges. And they were small colleges, so really was kind of jack of all trades, doing server admin and all sorts of things, desktop troubleshooting, printers, yuck. And along the way, started to pick up some knowledge on doing websites and HTML, and got put in charge of our intranet site back at the first college, and then ended up rebuilding our site at the second college I was working at as the IT director, which tells you how small it was. I was the IT director building the college website, and did that on Drupal originally, and then switched over to WordPress. And along with that, I had started, because I really liked doing website work, started trying to do some small business websites on the side. Okay. And started looking at performance of them. And I think it was around that time, 10 years ago or so, when we heard a lot about things that Amazon and bigger companies were doing, where they were shaving off like a tenth of a second and making $1 million or something. It was just ridiculous. And right. Of course, most of us aren't going to be making $1 million from 100 milliseconds, but right. The lesson still applies. And so that's where I started. And then there were tools out there for some of the performance stuff, and some of it you could just do manual on the server, but image optimization was not really something that had any great plugins for. Okay. One was really unreliable, and the other one just didn't work on shared hosting setups. Mm-hmm. And so I took the one that required kind of root privileges on a server, if you know what that is. Mm-hmm. I took that plugin and made it work on shared hosting.
Right.
And that was the beginning of the EU Image Optimizer. And from there, we, over the years added a compressed API for people that couldn't even run, command line stuff on their shared servers, and added a CDN service. And just this last year launched a complementary site performance plugin that we bundle with our image optimization services now.
Okay.
So that's kind of the short version.
Gotcha. Good stuff. As you mentioned, it's definitely very important. And of course, we all would have wished, if we do have an e-commerce site, I know everyone listening would wish if they were to cut a few milliseconds off the load time that we can make $1 million. Unfortunately, right. we're not all Amazon, and we hope that we aspire to something like that. But yeah, for the average e-commerce site, that's not happening. But the seconds that you can shave off for your business, no matter how small you are or how large, rather, then it can definitely make a difference. And so, where I want to kind of start off with today is when we're talking about site performance. Why is it so important when it comes to reaching customers and generating more traffic and sales? And if you can also kind of define, really, when we think of site performance, what falls under that category of site performance?
Sure. So that's a lot of stuff. So make sure I stay on track here. But first of all, going back to kind of that same mindset that Amazon had, that if you increase the speed of your site, it typically is going to increase your conversion. So whether that's newsletter signups or actual sales, like we're dealing with e-commerce sites here, performance is paramount. And the reason it's so important, we often think, oh, well, it's just because we're all so impatient, right? And we live in a fast-paced world and whatever. But it's actually because our brains are hardwired to dislike interruptions. And waiting for a site to load is an interruption to our brain's workflow. Gotcha. And so that's kind of I don't know if it's psychology or whatever it is. I'm no psychologist, but that's what I've learned over the years, is that's one of the biggest reasons why you want to make your site as performant as possible, because waiting aggravates people that are on your site. And even if you got them there and you got them to add something to the cart, you might lose them on the checkout if it takes 2 minutes to check out, So not necessarily, the whole process, but if they're sitting there waiting for it spinning for 2 minutes, they might be like, well, forget that. Shoot, even 10 seconds might be too much. People are usually a little more forgiving on the actual checkout process, it seems like, but navigating the site definitely needs to be snappy, needs to be quick. And so there's several different aspects of that. The one that I've focused on for a long time has been images. Of course, with the side projects that I started back in the day, I did all of it. I did page caching and everything else. But images was always first and foremost, because that was where you could find your biggest wins. Typically, if you're doing a great job of compressing your images, making sure they're the right size already, you might not see a huge difference by installing a plugin for it. But most people just don't have the time to dive into that real deep. So it's a lot easier when you can just upload an image and a plugin takes care of making sure it's well compressed and you got the right size and everything. And WordPress helps with some of the sizing issues out of the box, which is really nice. Not something that was the case 10 years ago. So there's that. And then, you've got other things like the page caching, of course, which I mentioned, which is a big deal. That makes sure that when someone's visiting your site, it's not having to go to the database to look up all the data needed to display that page. It's already cached as HTML code, and your server just goes, oh, here's the code, and sends it right onto the browser without even thinking about it. It just sends it, and that makes things a lot faster. In some cases, it can take it from 15 seconds to a couple hundred milliseconds. It's pretty incredible. And so that's just the page well, not really the render, but I don't know a good word for that, but it's the time to build the page, basically, on the back end. And then there's some things with JavaScript and CSS optimization that you can do. And so that's with the page caching and the JavaScript and CSS and fonts, I guess, too. That's where we've dived into in the last year or so with our new Swiss plugin. So
okay,
those are kind of the three areas that I usually focus on: images, page caching, and then basic asset optimization with JavaScript, CSS, and fonts.
Gotcha. Yeah, sounds good. That all definitely falls into the category of performance and helping improve a site's performance. Now, taking it back to the image optimization aspect of it, I know a lot of businesses out there that maybe have an e-commerce site. A lot of times these days, we've got a huge influx of businesses now that are just using these standard, I guess you could say kind of off-the-shelf solutions, or they're using the Shopify's of the world, or the Squarespaces, and all of these different platforms. And, they may have put up the site themselves. Maybe they've got somebody that's not necessarily a developer, quote unquote, or a designer, because as you know, with all of these quote unquote no code types of platforms, it's pretty easy to get a site up and running. And so I know a lot of times the owner, the business owner, whoever's in charge for that, they may not know, okay, what really should the size of these images be? Is there a general rule of thumb when you're thinking about, let's just say, any image on the home page? Should it be under a certain size? What do you usually recommend?
And that can be a tough one depending on how it's used in the page, but we usually recommend people at least cap them to about 1920, which is the typical widescreen 1080p resolution. It has a 1920 width. So that's what we usually say, that's kind of the top end. If you want to cater to folks on Macs a little bit more, you could go 2560, but unless you've got full screen images, that's really overkill. And even 1920 could be overkill in those sorts of cases. So if you're not doing much for full screen display, you could bring those down, to around 1,200 pixels wide, and that usually will help quite a bit in comparison to a typical digital camera image that might be 3,000-4,000 pixels or 6,000 pixels anymore. They're pretty huge.
Definitely. And what does that translate to as far as like the actual file size and megabytes?
Sure. And file size, I try to keep, if your image is over 100 kilobytes, it's probably too big.
Really?
A full width image would probably be over 100 kilobytes, but most of your images should be under 100. If you can get them down to the 10 to 30 kilobyte range, that would be ideal. And even more so if you're just displaying small thumbnails that are 150 or 200 pixels wide, those should easily be under 10 kilobytes.
Gotcha. Yeah, it makes sense. Because I know a lot of times, a lot of businesses are probably wondering, really what should it be? And, with these no code platforms, sometimes within these platforms, they'll have, I guess you could say, kind of image resizing tools where it'll kind of fit it in a certain block of the site, but it may not necessarily be reducing the file size. Maybe it may just be shrinking the dimensions, but not necessarily optimizing it. So it's definitely good to
for sure
know. Now, you mentioned, of course, there's other aspects of performance and optimization. You talked about CSS optimization. You talked about also caching using some of these networks. So for an e-commerce business that is just sitting down and just saying, okay, my site is slow, I've gotten some complaints, I really don't know where to begin. Are there certain benchmarks that they should be looking at to determine, all right, what they should be striving for?
Sure. There's a few different testing sites out there that folks can run their site through. The one we typically steer most people towards is GTmetrix. Of course, Google has their page speed insights, and GTmetrix uses some of the same, or a lot of the same, benchmarks as well, as far as different things that improve this, not just the speed, but also the user's perception. That's something you got to be careful of a little bit on Google's tests, especially, that they're not just looking at speed, they're also looking at things that impact user perception.
Right.
And for a bot to test users' perception is kind of tricky and can only really be simulated. So what I usually say with any of those, so whether it's page speed insights, GTmetrix, webpagetest.org, Pingdom, or any of those speed testing sites, look at what they're recommending. Don't necessarily focus as much on the score, because that can fluctuate wildly depending on, internet latency, and, if it's nighttime versus early morning or mid-afternoon. All sorts of things can affect the scores just completely randomly. But look at what they're telling you for recommendations and why they're giving you the score they're giving you. And that will often help you to know, okay, where's my biggest win? And that's kind of what I look at first, is where's your biggest win? Don't just start going down the list, but look for the things that'll have the biggest impact, and work on those first, because typically those are going to be easier to solve. Hopefully they're easier to solve. They're not always, but look for the ones that are going to get you the big wins.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's good. Good to know. Because I've seen some tests, I've seen GTmetrix, and I've seen some other testing sites where, they kind of hook you by giving you that score. But a lot of times, like you said, there's a lot of other factors there as to how they came up with that. And so just because it's a low score, like you said, at a certain time, it could be other factors, other reasons, times a day and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, especially on Google's page speed insights.
Yeah.
You look at their mobile test and everyone's like, well, I want my site to do really good on mobile. But the thing you got to remember with their mobile test is it's worst case scenario. It's on the slow 3G connection.
I see.
And most of us are on 4G, 5G. There's people on 3G, but slow 3G is a totally different animal. And that's so if you can get a good score on slow 3G, you're doing insanely good. So that's like, you're gonna have to spend days on it usually to get it really running nice on that. With certain plugins, they can cheat the system and kind of make it look like you're doing okay or better than you really are on those. But for the most part, that's something you got to be careful of. And even there was a site I was looking at with a customer last week, I think it was, and he kept getting around 10 to 30 on mobile, and he's like, what's going on? What can I do to improve this? And so we were looking at a couple different things, and then the next day we had done a few things, and I ran the test and it was at a 70. We're like, oh, that's fantastic. I ran it again and it dropped to 40 something. And I ran it one more time and it was even dropped a few more points. And then I ran it a fourth time and it was at 30. It's like, seriously, what's going on, Google? What is your problem? And so there's a lot of different factors. One of the biggest reasons we recommend GTmetrix is because you get to pick your testing location. And so because they're using similar metrics, and so it's like, well, why not choose Google's? Because they're the most popular. But that's the biggest reason, is it lets you choose the location, and it'll be more consistent that way, because you're always testing from the same pool of servers. With Google's, I'm sure they got servers all over the world, and so it's kind of random as to what servers you're going to get. And if you get 3 different tests in a row and they're all using different locations, and you're using a CDN, well, then you're really going to have trouble, because it's going to have slow performance all the way, because every time it's going to be getting uncached assets on the CDN. So that's a whole nother mess.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, if we're looking at all of these kind of 3 things that make up the whole performance, is there if someone is just sitting down and they're trying to figure out, okay, what's the best strategy for me to kind of dig in here, fix my site's performance, where do they start? Is there a particular strategy in mind when they're looking to kind of go through everything? What is there a particular thing that you would recommend as far as moving forward?
In general, I kind of go in the order that I mentioned earlier with the different categories, and that would be looking at image optimization first, and notably, making sure the images are well compressed, well optimized, and then properly sized. Lazy loading can have a huge impact there, especially if you have an image-heavy site. If you're showcasing a lot of the products on your homepage or on any given page, that can be super important. If you're only doing 6 to 10 on a page, you might get away with, decent performance. But if you've got more than 10, 20 images, lazy load is huge for that. Okay. And then going down from that, I always make sure, and almost I would say page caching first. Making sure you've got some sort of page caching, whether it's plugin based or server based. Most of those no-code solutions are going to have page caching built in. Better web hosts like Kinsta, WP Engine, Flywheel, I think Pagely. There's a bunch of the bigger managed hosts will have server based caching built in. But no matter what, that's like the number one plugin that I tell people to install, or functionality that you need, is make sure you have page caching, number one. Then hit the image optimization, looking at those different aspects. And if you get a plugin like ours, then it just takes care of most of that for you, which is fantastic. Saves me a lot of time. That's why I built it. Of course, then I'm spending all the time making it better. But and then JavaScript and CSS and those other assets, that tends to be lower hanging fruit, but it can, there's certain things with those that can make a big difference on rendering time. And that's the area where you get into where the site itself isn't necessarily any lighter, but there's things you can do to make it feel lighter to the user. And so deferring JavaScript, deferring CSS, and using critical CSS, or that above the fold CSS, having that inline to makes it so that as soon as that page is built, boom, it can be displayed and it doesn't have to wait for anything, which is kind of the ultimate in user experience on that.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks for sharing those resources and tips. That definitely helps. Now, as we get ready to close things out, one of the things that I was thinking about is, you mentioned doing things as far as the CSS, the JavaScript, and things like that. One of the things that I've seen a lot of sites get plagued with is these are specifically WordPress sites, is being slowed down by specific WordPress plugins that, for whatever reason, maybe these plugins aren't well optimized, maybe they're on slow servers, maybe they're calling a bunch of stuff, and those things can really slow down sites. I've seen a ton of different WordPress sites that are kind of plagued by this, and it's I've talked to the site owners and they're saying, I'm a great host, why is it so slow? What can be done when you're kind of dealing with these third-party plugins that have to render, and they're maybe it's a live chat, maybe it's some different widgets that you have. Is there anything that can be done other than trying another tool?
Yeah. So the first thing I always look at with any of those things, especially like a live chat or some of the like exit intent pop-ups and lead generators and stuff like that, is make sure that it can be loaded asynchronously or deferred. And so that can do wonders for performance on that side of things, since it basically makes it so that the page can be loaded and the user can see what's there, start interacting, and then all those extra bells and whistles get loaded in asynchronously, so without the user having to wait for them. And so that way you get all that nice functionality without having to suffer, making the user suffer for it. One of the things I was thinking of, especially with e-commerce sites, to watch out for with WooCommerce in particular that we've seen, is product variations. So if you're using product variations, be real careful that those aren't getting out of control, because if you have too many, that can really go nuts on the database, and you can end up with pages. We've seen pages that take a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes even, just to load a single page, and it's just all variations. They had hundreds of variations, and it was just like, oh, I think you need to revamp something here. So, and with that much, it was a big task, but hopefully they're able to make some headway on that, because no amount of page caching is going to fix that, because you're going to have people that are going to have that uncached page, and then they're going to be stuck, and you just lost that customer.
Yeah.
So
I've seen that too.
So even your uncached performance needs to be decent, at least in that 5 to 10 second range, if not better. But yeah, some of the things I've looked at over the years, because we've had plugins even on our site that I was like, man, something's slowing things down. In our case, it was on the admin side, so it wasn't as critical. But what I ended up doing is I just went through and started disabling my plugins. If you've got a clone of your site, that really helps. And a lot of hosts have staging setups that you can do, or you can just do a site clone with something like Duplicator, or there's another one I was thinking of, but I can't remember what it is. No. But there's a lot of different tools out there that will let you clone a site and set up basic copy, so that you can play around and mess around with that. If you're nervous about, if you're getting lots of traffic, you don't want to go disabling all plugins on your production site. But that can be one of the quickest ways. You start disabling plugins, and then as soon as it starts working fast again, you're like, oh, well, that was the one.
Right.
But a couple other plugins that can help narrow those down sometimes are Query. I think it's called Query Monitor. It lets you see any database queries that are slower, or things that are generating a lot of queries. There's one that kind of works, so you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt, which hopefully it's still maintained. I haven't used it in ages, but it's the P3. I think it's P3 Performance Profiler, something like that. But yeah, those are a couple of plugins that I've used. But sometimes you just disable plugins until you find the culprit, and then you go, oh, got it, finally. And then sometimes you can just report it to the developer and say, hey, I was having trouble with this, disabled your plugin, and everything got fast again. And if it's a solid plugin, they're going to want to fix that.
True.
In other cases, if the guy, whoever it is, doesn't respond for a week or two, then it's like, well, then maybe you better look for an alternative.
Right.
So
that's a good rule of thumb. When in doubt, just pull the plug and then see what's the culprit. But a lot of times, like you said, these developers, these companies that have these plugins, they may be aware of it. Maybe there's a fix to it, or they have another updated version of it that you just need to go forward with. So a lot of times they know, but pulling the plug is a quick way to kind of get down to it. So I appreciate that advice. That's
sure.
Piece there. Well, it's been awesome talking to you, Shane. I definitely learned a lot. Like I said, a lot of times on the podcast, we're talking about doing things to drive people to the site, but a lot of times people don't realize that all of these performance issues, no matter how much traffic they're driving to the site, it will, it may not pan out like they would have hoped for, because of site performance issues. Because like you said, our brains are hardwired to not have any interruptions. And then as soon as there's that interruption, that's a bad experience, and people are just going to jump ship. And on top of that, there's of course the attention span of people is definitely a lot less these days.
For sure.
Keep that in mind as well. People don't want to wait around for anything, so definitely keep that in mind. Well, it's been awesome talking to you, Shane. One of the things I always like to do when I close things out, just so our audience can get to know you a little bit better, if you don't mind sharing one closing fun fact about yourself that you think we'd be interested to know.
Yeah, sure. One of my favorite things to do around here is play disc golf. I've taken that up over the last few years, and it's been a blast playing and getting to know a lot of the guys around here, even in a small town that are playing disc golf, and nice way to unplug and relax. And Yeah. If you've never tried it, give it a shot. It's a blast.
Okay, gotcha. So disc golf, is that with like you're using a frisbee, or what is that actually?
Be careful calling it frisbee. I don't care, but some people are like, they're not frisbees, they're discs.
Okay. So it's
they are different. They're different.
Okay.
They're a different shape than what you would think of as a catch frisbee or something like ultimate frisbee.
Mhm.
Man, had a lot of fun with ultimate frisbee back in the day too. But but yeah, it's a different style disc. It's a lot thinner, a lot thicker rim. But yeah, it's a lot of fun watching those things fly. Once you figure out how to get those things gliding, it's just like, whoa, that was cool.
Okay. Good stuff. Yeah, and I'm sure in the spring and the summer. I know you said you're from Montana, and I'm sure it's great to be out in the lovely Montana air. I'm sure in the spring.
Oh yeah,
and summer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, great. Well, thank you for sharing that, Shane. I appreciate that. And lastly, before we let you go, if you don't mind letting our listeners know what's the best way for them to get in contact with you if they'd like to reach out to you and pick your brain any more about site performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So our website is EWWW.io. It's 3 W's. You can find us on Facebook and Twitter at EWWW.io. We're on YouTube, Rumble. You can search for us on there. Or you can just email us directly if you want to, support@EWWW.io. Free users, paid users, whatever. You got questions about images and site performance, just shoot us a note and we'll be glad to help you out.
Okay, that's awesome. Thank you, Shane, for sharing that. I definitely encourage people to reach out to you. And we love, it was great having you today on the E-Commerce Marketing Podcast.
Yeah, great to be here. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to the E-Commerce Marketing Podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share it with everyone you know. Are you looking to take your digital marketing to the next level but are tired of wading through countless YouTube videos with unproven and untrusted marketing strategies? Well, we have the answer for you. The More Sales Every Month online digital marketing course. In this information-packed course, you will learn effective keyword research, link building, content marketing, and much more to attract and convert your site visitors into paying customers. Just go to moresaleseverymonth.com and sign up today for a low one-time fee. In addition to this power-packed course, if you would like to get access to a growing repository of digital marketing articles, PDFs, and ebooks, check out getosi.com/resources and opt in to get full access to our library of priceless marketing information to help you take your digital marketing to the next level.